So the topic for our panel today is really around the nexus between creativity and the creative industries and science and technology. And joining me on stage, I've got four incredible panelists who I will introduce, although not in the order they're sat. Two to my right is Sherry Couture, an investor and serial entrepreneur in both the creative space and the technology space. Sherry is originally from Canada, a former CEO and now angel investor who serves on the boards of both charities, of educational institutions, and of companies. Most interestingly, at the moment, she's chair of Founders for Schools and is also on the board of Raspberry Pi. And we'll come on to both those things. Great to have you on board, Sherry. At the far end, we have Jayraj Mashru. He's founder of the Bombay Innovation Group, an innovation consultancy group. He's also a partner in Nation Lab, Z Nation Lab, an accelerator specifically targeting startups and building around innovation to help them scale and grow their businesses and develop the creative entrepreneurship ecosystem in India. To his left is Sir Mark Wolpert, Government Chief Scientific Advisor and indeed now Chief Executive, still designate, of UK Research and Innovation, the body in the UK that distributes, I believe, around £6 billion per annum of research funding into the science and technology sectors. Previously, he was with the Wellcome Trust, and even before then, he was the Professor of Medicine and head of the Division of Medicine at Imperial College London. Finally, to my immediate right is Karen Usher, co-lead for the NUMET model in technology and engineering. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the abbreviation of that. NMIT?
NMIT.
NMIT,
Yeah.
there you go. NMIT, a project based in Hereford, which is looking to completely revolutionize the model of engineering and technology thinking by broadening it, and I guess the discussion we've been having backstage, beginning to reintroduce the concepts of polymaths and of polymathematicians and people who benefit both from the softer and creative skills as well as the technology and science skills. So really to begin getting our discussion and throwing it open to any of you who feels like they want to pick it up, the Federation has been very clear and argued reasonably vociferously that there is value in the creative sectors, not only within the creative sector themselves, but it's important in unlocking innovation in markets and industries far beyond, such as manufacturing. Let me ask all of you, how critical is creativity in innovation in the sectors that you represent, and specifically the existence of the creative sectors in helping to drive that innovation that you see? Anyone wants to respond?
I can go first. I think in general, the real power of creativity, since morning we heard a couple of speakers mention the soft power of creativity. I actually disagree. I think it's just real power, specifically because, no offense, Sir Mark, but there are problems in the world that traditional R&D of the traditional industries, no matter how much money you throw at it, they just are not capable to solve that problem. We've seen it for about 100 years. And there are these other kinds of problems where there is a amalgamation of different creative sectors coming together and addressing that problem. I had the fortune of actually participating in a project with a global foundation called the Girl Effect, which is actually headquartered right here in London and supported by many big corporate companies. And they're trying to deal with gender inequality issues around the world. But their process is to bring in professionals from every creative line of work, from stand-up comedians and to filmmakers and designers and of course also folks from the social space. But this is kind of the real power. I think that creativity can infuse into just about any sector and really address the bigger challenges.
Are you using that example because the creative there engages broader audiences?
Exactly. It's a very inclusive process, and it really brings the end user front and center. It doesn't make for the user, it makes with the user. And that's really, I think, the big power of the creative sectors, especially when they start uniting across different disciplines of creativity.
To me, we live in a world where nothing is single-disciplinary anymore. And if we continue to treat things like in a single-disciplinary way, we run the risk of not being able to solve the big problems we've got, to take the big leaps and make the big opportunities. It just is impossible to separate out elements of design, elements of innovation from the making and the building and doing. And oh, by the way, we, in teaching, particularly my space, which is teaching engineers, we've stopped teaching them how to make. And if we're going to start teaching them how to make again, we need to go back to the creative industries to get a little help, teaching them to make, teaching them to draw, so that they can take what's up here and get it out there. So I think that's a critical element of blending those two. Yeah.
I think I'd agree with that. I think we've got new problems. You're seeing an acceleration of change in the world and political uncertainty such that we've never met, not only in this country but others. And it's only by drawing people together from a huge number of fields that we can create the world that we want to live in, because the world we're currently living in we may not like very much, and we're only going to create the future for ourselves if we infuse creativity and making and joint responsibility for creating, co-creating together our industry and the world that we want to live together. And that requires creativity. It's not the narrow specialization. And now more than ever, we need it with increasing intensity. And it's the most important thing I think that we have in front of us now.
So the other three panelists have basically just given the reasons for the creation of UK Research and Innovation, because it brings together all of the research councils, recognizing the point that actually if we're going to solve some of these grand challenges, we need the arts, we need the humanities, we need the social sciences. And I think that there's actually something of a false dichotomy between the sort of creative sector and science. It's completely false, really. And I think you can see this incredible interrelationship over time. So the first industrial revolution was powered by steam. The steam engine generated all sorts of extraordinary opportunities for the creative industries. And I would argue that what people call the fourth industrial revolution is also powered by steam. But in this case, it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics.
And so let me just press you there on that. Are you seeing and indeed expecting, or you see it in your new role as part of your remit, to ensure that that genuinely happens, not just the breaking down of interdisciplinary boundaries within science and technology, because certainly I know that was a big driver behind the role, but also beyond the boundaries of science and technology?
Absolutely, it's how we bring it all together. I mean, if you just look at the products that are transforming the world, you could say that the person that had made Apple most of its money was Jonathan Ive, a British designer, because technology only works for people if it's beautifully designed. And so it just seems to me that we need to take a completely integrated view to this. This theatre is the product of the most extraordinary. It provides the opportunity for creative content, but it's based on technology. And of course, one of the things, and the ministers mentioned it earlier, we are fantastically good at content generation. But the trick now is to present that content using all of the opportunities that the new technologies offer.
A role that I feel we're playing a small part in it at YouTube. So let me just, sticking specifically with you, Sir Mark, around, and I'm going to dip to one of the questions on the Slido. Do you believe there is sufficient funding to develop that next generation, or to accelerate the UK's opportunity in developing the next generation of creative technologies?
I do think that there's the funding. It doesn't all come from the public sector. Sherry is, your view will be extremely important on this. It's how the public sector works with the private sector. But I think it's also about getting the industry onto the front foot, working, and one of the critical things with all of this is innovation, because it was Edison who said that genius was, genius was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And that applies for the creative industries as much as it does for science and technology. So I think it's actually about getting really, really good propositions together. And I think that too often people are on the back foot. They wait for a sort of grant call. And what we need to do is to have a really good menu of opportunities.
Great. Sherry, maybe a good point for you to jump in there. So bringing both your perspective of having been an investor, but also a CEO, and in particular now fostering and helping develop a number of startups. What's your angle on that? And in particular, the point Mark raised of that crossover between private and public investment.
Yeah. So If you think about, so I like the combination of technology and what people want to do. So if I think about the first company that I started, the technology that we had discovered decreased the cost of achieving the same outcomes by 100 to 1. And that meant that things that previously were absolutely impossible suddenly were. And that is, whenever you can make that happen, that's fantastic. And in the crossover between public and private, you're making me think about the destinations data that the government has released and some of the databases that there are. I think of the National Pupils Database and our need here to string things together, to see what the impact is, to see where we put our investment. I think that if you say the National Pupils Database, that allows you to see what children do. And no, I don't think any other country anywhere in the world has made that accessible. What that will allow me to do as an entrepreneur who is currently operating within the charity sector, or largely operating with the charity sector, that allows you to see which of your hunches are really working. So you can stop doing the things that don't work. That experimentation, that testing of hypotheses. As an entrepreneur, I don't really accept that there is failure. I think that you're testing a lot of hypotheses, you're seeing what works. And that creativity of testing that thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, so that you can choose the one that works is really, really important. If I go back to Zoopla, which is a company, we started off a government database, but we had a creative issue that we wanted to try to solve. If we look at Founders for Schools, that was from the EduBase, and it's trying to solve the talent problem that we all have. And if there's one thing that's worth betting on, it's that the talent issue that we have is worth solving, which is absolutely what we're doing at Raspberry Pi. We had seen, I don't know if you know the story, we had seen a decrease in the number and the quality of applications coming to the university. And we thought that part of that might have been because people were used to consuming things rather than pulling them apart and putting them back together themselves. And so by creating a platform to enable people everywhere to pull things, put things together and pull them apart and put them back together again, then the creative bench was again open to everybody. And the price tag for doing that was not hundreds of pounds, but tens of pounds. And in case of Pi Zero, £5. So suddenly you've got the ability to use a computer to bring together teams to achieve things, and the cost has gone down to 1/100th. What does that do? It means it's possible to put the power into the hands of the children for the first time and of educators, and that's really, really important. And that changes the whole model of everything, which is why I love is there enough money? Absolutely, particularly if we're mindful about testing hypotheses and working together as diverse teams to share what's working and what's not working, and to be happy to stop doing the stuff that isn't working, because we're not going to run out of things to try.
And let me just get you to dig in a little more then on the Raspberry Pi story, because it is a brilliant example of something that's absolutely at the nexus of creativity and technology, and it moves us on to I'm going to use the word trending, which is probably a big thing for the Slido that has so far 14 votes, but still, trending topic is around education on the Slido, and clearly the question is around how do we guarantee a pipeline. But I guess what I'd like to get you to touch on a little bit more is that pipeline has to start very early. Right? And I think maybe I'd love everybody's thoughts on how early that pipeline needs to start and how we can ensure that begins to happen.
So there's one phrase I like, if it's 8, it's too late. So I think starting early is really, really important. One of the things we did recently, again, using a data set, a government data set made available through the creative industries, was we plotted within a 2-mile radius of every school in Britain, whether or not there was a creative industries company within 2 miles of it. It had to be 2 miles because it was walking distance, and we wanted to encourage teachers to pull the creative industry entrepreneurs into their classroom to talk about the jobs that they were creating and talk about how excited they were about what they did. Because linking what we're doing in a classroom in an academic sense together with what our future together that we have to create with our brothers and sisters from different industries is really important. And we can't, it's a community. We can't point a finger at a government minister or a teacher or a business person and say, it's up to you. It's up to us. So we were plotting whether or not it was possible to have a policy of saying, well, we should all go back to school and we should go talk in schools. Yep. And we should invite all school children into our headquarters. And sometimes those headquarters only have 5 people working in them or 3 people working in them. And you know what? They're the most fabulous, interesting companies to work in.
So
the job satisfaction.
This
is an ask. When you get asked,
did you all hear it?
Yeah, I hope you guys. When you get asked by a teacher near you if you will go speak in their classroom, please say yes. And if they ask if they can bring 5, 10 students by to see what you actually do in the creative industries, it's really important because we love what we do, and it's the strongest industry that we have, and it's growing like topsy-turvy, and it is driving the economic growth of our whole economy. So, but we have an obligation not to sort of leave it up to somebody else to, when asked, take part in that community and go talk about what you do and show people what you do, because what we as entrepreneurs and as members of a capitalist society, we create our world. And how do you link that with somebody who's excited about languages, or how do you link that with somebody that's excited about physics? You know, Eben from Raspberry Pi, amazing physicist, amazing entrepreneur, and had a dream. Without his co-founder, or several co-founders, but one particular, his wife, who's a very strong communicator, would that story have gained? If they hadn't set it up as a charity that owned a company, that very creative business model, would it have worked? Would it have enabled the entire ecosystem to see that they could come together and make something happening? I don't think so. But again, it was that creativity bursting down barriers that made a huge difference. But if we don't get kids as early as 6 understanding that they need to create the things that they will use, they won't know that. And they'll come up expecting somebody else to do it for them. Culturally, it's important.
Particularly that early stage education, then we'll come to universities afterwards. But Karen, your thoughts on?
Well, I completely agree. I love 8 is too late as a phrase, but I worry about the years between the current 8s and now. I mean, we've got a lot going on. And I think, I do think the question of barriers is at the core of that. And I think in all kinds of ways, we've established barriers that have become, if nothing else, habits. We do them because we've always done them. We always require maths and physics to enter an engineering program. Why? Well, I don't know, because we then go teach math and physics in the first year of engineering. The Americans fondly call that the math science death march. And there's no question that you need maths and physics and engineering. That's not the question. The question is, when do you use it? And if you're going to use it as part of the toolkit for engineering, you can teach it at a different time. And oh, by the way, you may not need to require it. That's an artificial barrier. It particularly has an influence on women, but it also has a great influence on anyone who's studying anything outside of maths and physics who may want to be an engineer and who may be a very, very good engineer. So I think the whole question of barriers is something that we can do now to start to reduce. And then continue to work on the 8 is too late and
it's like 8, 9, 10, 11, but between 13 and 16 here, they make very irreversible decisions because of the current system.
Absolutely, the current system. The secondary system is not our friend on that.
Let me just move it on to Joe and to Mark, just in terms of your thoughts, again, on that early stage education. What are there issues today? And if there are issues today, what more can be done?
Well, I'm a medic, so I think we probably need to go antenatally or possibly preconception. and there's a serious point here, which actually what we're talking about is about our culture and our values, actually. And so it's the society in which we live. And I think I would disagree with you about maths and engineering. You can't start maths late, but you can do maths alongside the arts and the humanities. And I think the one thing that all of us need is to have maths and English throughout our education, because being numerate and being able to communicate...
And we do.
Almost.
GCSEs, through at least GCSEs now.
Yeah. And I think also we need to think about lifelong skills as well. But I mean, I suppose we did work on cities, and I was quite influenced by the work of Jane Jacobs and about place. And what makes a good place? It's a place where you can live, work, and play. And so I just think we need to take a completely integrated view of this. But education is absolutely critical, and if you are educated in an environment which is devoid of creativity, then you're not going to get the best education. It's as simple as that.
Do you think that exactly that statement is heard enough in government? Because I guess certainly reading the questions here and hearing those of us who are in the creative sectors, you don't often hear people in government saying, wow, they're teaching too much science and the kids are getting far too much maths in school, whereas we have, as a sector in recent years, been under threat. Things have been struck from the curriculum.
Well, being the government chief scientist, I stay out of politics, so...
Do you think you have an easier job?
But the short answer is that I think that as an advisor, I'm very clear that actually we do need a very broad curriculum, and we do need, the arts are extraordinarily important as well as... But as I say, I think it's very unfortunate getting into a competition about it. We shouldn't do that. And of course, education happens in other places than schools as well. And that is the culture point, actually. It's the environment in which people are brought up, where they have more or less fortune in terms of their opportunities. And it is why I think ultimately it is about culture and values, at least as much as whether you start at the age of 1 or any other age.
So, Jay, I'm going to come to you because I know you've been involved in designing courses, again, both in particular at university. So maybe you can move us on to how do we, having solved schools, great, tick, how do we ensure that we deliver that sort of polymath world through universities?
Actually, and I'm a little disappointed to admit that the Supreme Court of India just a couple of weeks ago has decided they made a judgment and they allow schools now to make math optional, and I was very, very sad to have read that. So hopefully if somebody from India is ever going to listen to this, maybe they can think about that again. But in the meanwhile, yes, I think that's a very important question, but I did like to build up a little bit on the comments made earlier. Yes, 8 is too late, perhaps early is better. The earlier, the better, but I don't think early is enough. My brief experience in academia, I was shocked to find out that a brand new textbook released this year for the first time ever was actually written 10 years ago. And by the time this first student reads that textbook, it's already too out of date. It's already too obsolete. And so I think that early is great, but rapid is even better. Industry is moving way too fast. Technology is disrupting technology itself. And so academia really needs to move a lot more fast in terms of what is embedded into the curriculum. And one of the things I actually, of course, YouTube is a great source of learning now. It's not just for entertainment. Massively open online courses like MOOCs on your phone, learning something new on the subway home, on the tube, that's incredible. It's really empowering. But I don't think it's also about creativity alone. I think creativity, at least in the courses that I designed at the Indian School of Design and Innovation in Mumbai, and the classes that I teach over there as well, I always insist that creativity needs to be preceded by curiosity. You need to spark curiosity in the mind of a learner, and then empower them to explore on their own. And so therefore curriculum perhaps can be a little bit more self-selective as opposed to top-down. Here's the subject, here's a book, and this is what you need to learn. I think that model is out of date. I don't think we live in that world anymore where somebody can tell me what I need to learn and then prepare me for a career for a lifetime. So I think what we really need to focus on in education, regardless of whether it's in the creative sectors or in any other sector, it's to really empower students to build their own mental models so that they understand how they need to learn new things, because they need to learn new things for the rest of their lives. It doesn't end in school. And any time in your life is a good time to go back to school. So I totally agree with some of the comments that were made earlier, but yeah.
So maybe a really good time, Karen, for you to talk everybody through a little bit what it is you're doing in Hereford and give us a bit of a sense of that.
We've had the luxury and the challenge of creating one of the few completely new, from a blank sheet of paper, universities in the UK now in about 40 years. And the first 3 or 4 years were a lot about listening, but the path forward is going to look something like this. First of all, you guys have just teed this up beautifully, looking for students with curiosity, grit, and passion. They have to have taken maths for most of their education, but don't have to have selected it for their A-levels. They will enter an institution that is teaching in a pedagogically significantly different way, in the sense that we'll be teaching in 3-week interdisciplinary blocks based around an industry problem that's designed to teach the core engineering learning, but which also has about 35% of its content in either the creative side or the lifelong learning skills side, et cetera. We're not teaching traditional electrical, mechanical, civil. All of the programs that a student can create themselves or pick their own pathway on, to your point, are interdisciplinary, either tied to one of 4 global problems or tied to one of 4 industry sectors. And those are flexible enough that as industry changes and as the needs of industry or the interests of students evolve, they can plug and play a lot more flexibly. In the classroom, to point out, we will have no lecture halls. Everything will be taught in seminars and in studios and in labs. And students will work in varying different combinations of groups of 5 throughout the program. And there will be no exams. They will create portfolios so that when they sit down at the end of their career or their time with us, they can show what they have made and what they have done as a way of demonstrating to either their employer or their graduate program, what it is that they are able to do and make and deliver. And it's a master's program.
Has that concept been received more broadly within the education?
It's been really interesting. It is, I think,
interesting in an English way.
In a positive way. Interesting in a very positive way. In an American way. There's been, we've had absolutely unfettered support. And as I say, you know, copying is the best form of flattery. We've just gotten word that there's an institution who shall remain nameless in the UK, but a very well-known one, whereas we're nobody at this point, who's about to launch a program almost identical to ours, which is great, because in reality, the more the merrier. And so we're thrilled with that, and we will launch, and I think the last thing to point out is we've taken the opportunity of the natural delays that come with huge, complex projects, and we're actually bringing 25 students in, starting in the spring, to design with us. So we actually have the end user sitting with us and saying, this should be more like this, so I'd learn better if that. So it's been quite an exciting project, and we're very close to going. Yeah.
So it sounds like a wonderful experiment. I'm tempted to ask what the control group is, but there's a serious point. It turns on Sherry's point, which is that this database, which is the longitudinal educational outcomes database, now puts us in a position to evaluate this, because actually the real question is what will happen to these people. And also, of course, there's the self-selection of who decides to come to you.
It's a very interesting opportunity to do that kind of measurement, because there's not a single element that we're undertaking that hasn't been done somewhere else in the world successfully, sometimes in combinations of 2 or 3. But this will be the first time that about 12 major elements are brought together into one pool, and to see what happens with that will be and we are already measuring.
But I think there is a serious point in there, which is that in the world of medicine, you do controlled clinical trials. There probably isn't enough experimental work in education, actually working out what does and doesn't work.
And that's been the biggest obstacle, is that there isn't a history of experimentation in education. There's a lot of talk about it, but not much practice of it.
And is that mostly because there isn't, or hasn't at least been, the baseline data that everybody can agree on is the baseline data?
No, it's because education is a very complex intervention, and it's actually extremely difficult to do it. It's not like comparing taking an aspirin and taking a paracetamol tablet. So it's quite complicated.
Well, I think the gestation period is just so long, right? It takes 10 years to build a textbook, but it takes maybe 40 years until you know if a student's made it in life or not, right?
So I think there's some great research. I mean, I think of the Gatsby research that's going on careers and employability, which again, certainly inputs on the guidance that we give to teachers. But I actually think I hadn't asked for the audience, but I think the ask may actually be for educators, and particularly in secondary and primary. Use the assets around you, and those assets actually right now work in the creative industries and science industries and the other industries. But to think that a new book is 10 years out of date, and to depend upon that and to not ask the assets in your local labor market whose stories are worth hearing and are free. People don't charge to go into school. We've been doing it for 6 years. Nobody charges to visit the school and talk about the jobs they're creating. That's just a gift. And as long as the people who are creating the jobs are willing to share them with local schools, and I was amazed to see that, within 2 miles of every single school in the UK, there were people that could be drawn in and asked. The ask almost isn't to you, the ask is almost to, we probably have enough evidence now about employability and how critical it is to mandate, get your local assets in the form of business leaders into your classroom, because it's really important, because we can't keep up with everything in, looking at it from a desk or from a textbook.
Yeah. In fact, at the Indian School of Design and Innovation, our campus is built inside a corporate building. Yep. It's so easy for an executive to just ride the elevator and walk into a classroom. And in fact, we don't even call them classrooms there. Everything is a studio. Everything is anti-disciplinary. And you could literally, in one room, have 3 different groups of students working on 3 different types of projects.
I mean, work experience. I mean, everybody should have it. I mean,
but picking up that point specifically, I mean, we've been talking about traditional forms of education, but employability is at least as much about your social and emotional skills as it is about your technical knowledge of A or B. And that's where creativity is also so important, because it helps you with your social and emotional skills. And teamwork.
And so if we were to try and distill this down into asks, in particular, I guess, given that we've had the ministers preceding us on stage, what would the asks around the education, both in school and into university, what would our one ask be for government to ensure that that pipeline is as rich as you've all described it, and as you've all become very animated describing it and talking about it? How do we ensure that it becomes as rich as it could be, and it is as plentiful in supply as we all would like to see it being?
Mine would be make it possible, give teachers permission, or even an instruction, I'm sure permission is probably the better thing, to use the assets in their community, the business assets in their community, so that children can learn about resiliency in the world of work that they will enter and measure it. It's kind of a complex, but you need to measure it, because that's the experimentation, and that will change our culture and put magical things in their hands. But I think perhaps it's the curriculum, or perhaps the other issues. I'm not sure if they feel they have the permission, or they have the time to do it, or they imagine it's harder than it is, but it's not hard.
For us, it's about building a bridge between the point we see our students arrive and the point they leave us. And I think that there's a lot of inflexibility that comes from the history of how we've done things. And I think I'd like to just see the government relax a little bit, not on quality. Quality is king, but on what they allow or are comfortable with to come into a curriculum or to come into a process, because the hoops to jump through are significant, particularly in the higher education sector. I know they're there because I'm a governor, and I know they're there as well, but yeah.
Mark, because you were a little resistant on that one.
Well, we've done a foresight programme in the Government Hospital of Science on the future of schools, and we've made a lot of those points, actually. And I don't think there's anything we've said that policymakers are surprised by. At the end of the day, it is the quality of the teaching that's paramount, actually. It's the people that actually deliver the education. And, I mean, whilst I think technology can do a lot, I think there are some questions there about the effectiveness. And I don't think that with all of the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think the teacher, the human being, is going to continue to be important.
And so how do we ensure that we get the type of teacher who can inspire that interdisciplinary approach?
Well, I mean, again, that's about inspiring people through the education process, that teaching is an enormously valuable and rewarding thing. And look at the effects of Teach First. That was an incredibly successful scheme, inspired some of the brightest youngsters to go into teaching, and they've stayed there.
Jay, your thoughts? The one ask that
creative industries in the UK the biggest help that any government can give to any education institute is autonomy. To let them react to changing environments as quickly as they possibly can, and to support that, right? When they can't, if they need more money, if they need more resources, to provide that so that academia is not lagging behind industry. For example, if a school does want to do something a little differently and maybe perhaps a little radical, run an experiment, try a learner-led approach to education, then to support that. Let the school fail if it does for a year or two, and maybe all the schools in the world will learn from that. So don't be so afraid, perhaps, and controlling, to dictate the outcomes. Because I don't think that any government has been able to. Maybe perhaps Finland is an exception. They have one of the world's best education systems, very, very disruptive going forward. But it's because they're very learner focused, and the government steps back.
Okay, final question for all of you, and then we're going to have to close it down because we have a flashing clock already. And taking it away from education for a moment potentially, but Mark, you said that it was a false dichotomy, the difference between art and science axis, that it's a false dichotomy. But actually, so many areas of life, whether it's at university or outside, whether it's my organization, the engineers or the product guys are somewhere in between, and then there's the creatives. How do we construct both a society more broadly where the question, as it's on the tablet, says techies and lovies can get together more industry. So how do we ensure that all of our institutions and our public space, if that's what we want to call it, allows that interaction to happen?
Well, I think if you look at much of our evolving public space, and it does depend on the state of the economy, engineering is beautiful, and it is actually when designers come together with engineers. And it's very rarely a single individual. Innovation, actually, at the end of the day, is about teams of people. A creative person may actually not be able to innovate at all at the end of the day in terms of delivering a product. And so it's, I think, how we work in teams. And we've just got to recognize that actually that's what makes places wonderful to live in.
Others, your thoughts, Karen?
We're doing it by breaking down the departmental barriers. We're not going to have departmental barriers. We're putting musicians right next to mathematicians, and the mathematics of the concerto may be the resulting course to teach our mathematics. So I think the key is starting. It's like any other corrective behavior. If you're biting your nails, sometimes you just have to sit on your hand. Well, in this case, I think we have to say we want any disparate groups to sit together and to be together. And then the natural joy and the natural juice that comes from that will start to flow, because it's there. It's just that we've artificially separated it inadvertently, I think.
Sherry, your thoughts?
I'm thinking about using convening power. It's very cheap. It allows relationships to develop, and therefore barriers to break down, and also for shared visions to come together. So if, one ask that doesn't really cost very much at all is, let's use our convening power and do that across generations, across genders, across disciplines, across lines also between, government, education, and business. I think we all are part of a community, or as you just said, a place. But we're a part of a community, and we have things that we want to create together. Depends on which community hat you have on, but let's convene more, because we can achieve more together.
Fantastic. And Jayaraj, anything, last thoughts from you before we close up?
Really, I think there's just one other point that I slipped out of my mind that I thought was very important is multi-pedagogical teaching or learning, right? Because the way I would learn how to play a guitar is very different from the way I would learn how to play tennis, is very different from the way I would learn math. And maybe it's not about the teacher being a teacher. Maybe it's about a teacher facilitating that, interdisciplinary or anti-disciplinary approach of learning. So putting different people in the same room and giving them a common problem to solve as a team is a fantastic way. I think in my design programs, that's working out really, really well. To the point where literally we have a corporate executive walking into class, giving a problem, and we have engineering and design students working at it together, and within a day or two, they're able to prototype something that's new and take it back to the executive. And that's such a rapid cycle of self-rewarding, learning that's happening.
So apologize for overrunning. I thank you for indulging us. I only did it because the volume of votes and the volumes of questions got so high. Apologies if we didn't get to yours. Join me in thanking Karen Usher, Sherry Kutu, Sir Mark Walpole, and Jay Rajmashri.